Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Return to the Realm, a rereaders podcast for the Realm of the Elderlings series by Robin Hobb. Oh my god, I actually managed to pronounce
You
multiple names
did it!
correctly.
Yay!
I'm Kayiu, joined by Alex and Leah, and today we're going to be covering Assassin's Apprentice chapters 5 through 10. So, in this section, Fitz um, kind of is put to the test, has his loyalty put to the test by Chade. Um, kind of his father dies, and then he has his first big mission. And at the end of the section, we finally find the main antagonist of the series of this trilogy, the Red Ship Raiders. See? Um, so should I start us off with chapter 5, or does someone else want to take it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So chapter 5. Oh, whoops. Sorry, my computer is not happy with me trying to open up Google Docs at the same time that I'm also streaming. Okay, so chapter 5, which is called Loyalties. Um, this entire chapter is just a horrible test that Shrewd puts Chade up to, where it's basically trying to force Fitz to betray King Shrewd by stealing something from his room. And it's this horrible manipulative thing where Chade kind of like knowingly uses Fitz's reverence of him to kind of like emotionally manipulate him on several different axes to try and get him to do this thing and see if he will betray Shrewd. Um, which for Fitz, who has like literally no one he can trust anymore because he doesn't trust Birch that much after the nosy. He doesn't. He has the people in town, but he doesn't really have them on a day-to-day basis. So Chade is like his one rock, and then for this to happen, it kind of just messes him up perpetually for the rest of the series. This is like the root of all of his trust issues, and for now and forever.
Yeah, this was really painful to read, especially because, like, even the people in town, he can't reveal most of his life to because he doesn't want them to know that that's just one space away from being the bastard. So Shade is the only person that knows every facet of Fitz, and then he's the person that is asking him to do something that is off of what he had promised and off of what may have been a skill command. So physically, he wouldn't even be able to do it if he wanted to. But the fact that it makes him so physically ill, and they let him go on like that for a while, like long enough at least that Birch has enough time to get him hammered and try to work through it.
It's like a week.
Alcohol. Yeah.
Minimum.
Like, it shouldn't have been longer than like 10 minutes of him being like,
Yeah,
okay,
like
you
Yeah,
said
he
you
should have
wouldn't
seen
do
that
it.
Fitz wasn't going to do it.
Right. Right.
I think
yeah, and
the
like
whole
okay, to what
reason
you
that it
just
lasted so long was because of Shrewd.
Yeah, Shrewd's a dick.
Yeah.
Straight up.
it's so weird because like Shrewd is weirdly really soft when it comes to Regal, when it comes to like Queen Desire, but everyone else he has zero empathy for. He's just like for the good of the kingdom and for the good of me, and it's like, how?
Yeah. There's so much that especially if you are reading or have read later books recently and you go back, this trilogy feels like the dark ages of the Six Duchies technologically, and every no one can trust anyone. Like, later books, Dutiful has a pretty honest and secure a group of people or coteries around him, and Shrewd alienates everybody by being like, how can I use you? And
I
there's
will
no
say
more
though,
than that.
it's really interesting how because Dutiful, it takes him a while to trust Fitz, right? And there's almost a similar dynamic where Fitz imprints a skill command on Dutiful, and it's like, oh no. And, but yeah.
I
Like,
think he would have trusted Fitz sooner if he had known who Fitz was right away. But Fitz keeps him in the dark for a while because he's so paranoid. And he meets Fitz under the guise of, like, you need to come home right now. And he's a teenager being shitty and he doesn't want to, you
He's
know?
like, no
So,
thanks.
like, yeah, he's like, you want me to follow the rules and go back home with you. So, no, I don't like you.
yeah, pretty much. Um, Going back to what you said about it being a skill command, I was looking out for lines that supported that, and then like when Shade is like growing him, he's like, I promise to be loyal to Shrewd. There's a part where he's like, name anyone else. So it's not even like a thing for loyalty. It's like seems to be like or like royalty. It seems to be specifically Shrewd because he also mentions I can go steal from Regal. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Regal sucks. Um, and then there's a line that I found really telling, which is once Fitz is like dismissed by Chade and goes back to his room. He says, "I found no indecision in me. I could not do the thing Chade asked of me," which seems like really like skill commandy to me.
Mm-hmm. Because you would think a little kid would waffle about it at least a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But he's very much this, and knowing who Fitz is, Fitz tends to waffle about every decision, always. And this is one of the few where he's super final that I can't do this and I won't do this.
Mm-hmm.
But you would think if Shrewd knew about the skill command that he put on Fitz, that he wouldn't have made the test go on so long.
Maybe because he didn't know, Shrewd doesn't even know all that much about the skill, right? So
Yeah.
maybe he was like, I tried to put a command on this kid, but I don't really know if it worked. Let me do this test and see.
He's just a paranoid bastard. Like
Yeah,
God.
I really don't like Shrewd.
I feel like Shrewd kind of gets caught up in the mythology of his own name a little bit, where he's
Yeah.
like, hey, he basically just thinks like I'm such a big brain. Everything I do is for the good of the kingdom, and it's like, no, dog. Sometimes you just make selfish decisions, and you don't have the self reflection to be able to tell that. Like
Or
Loth,
you
I feel
just,
like basically every Farseer in the first trilogy needs someone to like. They need someone to check them and like butt heads and like someone who like doesn't just take their shit because they're a monarch, but no one really steps up into that role.
I also
Yeah.
feel like they all need someone to just give them a solid hug.
That too.
I think they're all definitely lacking in love and affection, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My only other note about this chapter in particular was the knife thing, but that happens at the end, so I don't know if
I have a couple things
that
before.
later. Yeah, okay, I'll hold off.
Um, I think it was I took a quote from the section where Shrewd and Shade are arguing over Fitz, like when he's like in bed, still kind of sleeping ish, and he's like
Yes.
in his depression. And I think that this is Shade who says this, and he says, "It isn't his loyalty she's worrying about or mine." Who do you guys think the she is that's being referenced here? It can't be the queen, right? The queen wouldn't be in on all of this.
That passage, and I've read this book now 3 times, and I've read like the series as a whole, and I still like have trouble figuring out A, who is talking at each part, and B, who I don't know who she is. I'm just confused by that whole part.
There's also like another line that really confuses me because one of them says, "Don't like you're gonna break him like you broke the other one." I'm like, the other one? Who is the other one? Because we never hear this referenced again.
Yeah.
Well, I think that there were definitely other assassins before Fitz, because
Oh, maybe it
I feel
like
like
broke
Shade
the
could never
arm.
act alone.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and you know, we know from seeing like August, that if you try to skill too hard on somebody or make them go against whatever's skilled within them, it will just make them go insane. So maybe he had a former like assassin apprentice that Shrewd tried to test and pushed too hard, and they just ended up kind of a dud.
I don't know,
Yeah.
but like given how much I feel like how much in later trilogies we like learn stuff about like things that were like subtly referenced in the first. I'm really surprised that that didn't come up in some form. I'm just like I need to know.
I
Like
really want to know who she is. 'Cause
Same.
the
Because
only
I definitely don't think it's the queen.
right, but then like who else would they be talking
I
about?
feel like it probably is the queen, and even like because again, I feel like Shrewd has a real soft spot for Queen Desire. Like in the same, like I think we see it mostly through the way that he has a soft spot for Regal, but also I think it's like implied because like Fitz basically says like, "Yo, she was deep in her cups for like the last whatever many years. She would be drunk and rambling. She was basically an embarrassment to the court." And you'd think that Shrewd would do something about that to help the reputation of the Farseers, but he never really does anything about Desire. And I think that's again because he has kind of a soft spot for her.
Well, and she's so blatantly treasonous, and he just kind of is like, ah ha ha, my crazy, drugged up wife.
Mhm.
Whereas if anyone else was that blatantly, like if Fitz said 1/4 of the shit that Desire would say, Shrewd would have had him killed. And that's his
Mhm.
grandson. Like,
But
he,
wouldn't that also play on like a reason not to tell her all of this? Because if she is so like loose with her tongue about such treasonous things, you would think that she would, I don't know, say some stuff about the secret things that she knows about the royal family as well.
and by this point, Chivalry's still alive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say maybe they wanted to keep her in the dark so because she could have had a hand in Chivalry's death, and maybe they're trying to protect Fitz from that, but I don't know that Shrewd is ever gonna be trying to protect Fitz from anything, so it's not a good
No.
theory.
I think maybe I'm thinking like one indication that maybe Queen Desire does know about the little assassins is isn't there a thing where later Regal kind of has this thing where like, oh yeah, Lady Time and you killed my mother. Um, so it could be the roots of that could have been maybe Queen Desire's paranoia about the assassins, which is why um, it isn't his loyalty she's worrying about or mine. Could be like Desire becoming paranoid about the assassins and then maybe confiding that in Regal, and that's how Regal gets this thing notion of like, oh, she was murdered, she was super killed.
Yeah,
This is a big leap in logic, but I'm just like I'm trying to like think of how this could fit.
Regal doesn't even know that Shade exists. Like he straight
I
up
mean,
thinks
he
Lady
knows of
Time.
Shade, but as Lady Time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he really thinks that Time is like a real person that's an assassin.
Hmm.
But yeah, that passage puzzles me. I read it like 3 times in a row, trying to piece out who was saying what, because I knew the conversation was Shade and Shrewd, but I was like, who's saying which part? Whose loyalty is in doubt here? Who is she? Who? There's just so many questions from that like half page or 1/4 page
Yeah,
of
it's one of those
dialogue.
where like you'd expect it to become easier to decode on a reread because it's like, oh yeah, now I know it's Shade and Shrewd. Because in the first time
Yeah.
you're like, well, what do you
Who is
mean?
this?
Yeah, it's just
And I
sound like
love that
one man
she
arguing with
says it.
himself.
Yes, I love that she says that. I think that's the coolest thing. And then like I feel like you get snippets and like hints that Shade has more to do with the royal family than Fitz knew
Uh-huh.
later on in
Mhm.
the book.
Well, and it's confusing because it's confusing to Fitz because he's
Yeah.
basically in like a fever dream. And you read it as if you're in kind of that same fever dream. So it makes sense that it's really difficult to puzzle out. But yeah, I wish that we had more answers about what they're talking about.
Okay. Other lines that I called out here. And that too was a thing I believe it was intended I learn to obey without asking why an order was given. And I love how he says I believe it was intended I learned because Fitz definitely doesn't learn this. Like the at least especially as the series goes on and as he grows older. I feel like it's a kind of arc where like almost all of us go through where like we grow up and then we think our parents are infallible when we're kids and we grow up and we're like, wait, dude, they're just motherfuckers just like us, like whatever. Like, but I feel like Fitz is forced to learn that really.
Yeah. He also, I think, struggles because he learns this, like, always do what you're told and don't question anything. And then as he gets older, people start asking him, like, his thoughts and opinions, and he's so uncomfortable ever, like, giving those. And it's almost like a parallel of society. Like, we're told as kids, just do what you're supposed to do and listen to the grown-ups. And then you get to a certain age and they're like, what do you want to do? And you're like, I don't know, tell me. You know, it's kind of what Fitz goes through as well.
It's just like I would like to do nothing, please.
Mm-hmm. I would like to live on a farmstead and have a baby and do nothing else and just chill with my wolf.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Which, same. I would also like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I was even a little more outdoorsy, I would be like, cabin out in the middle of nowhere?
Yes,
Fitz's
please.
life at the beginning of Tawny Man is like my ultimate dream.
Oh, it's ideal for sure.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think if just one or two more regular visitors, like if the Fool came as a regular visitor, easy. Just like you have good,
Yeah.
you get
Not
that
just
company,
solely
you
by
also
yourself.
get your like, yeah. Another line that stood out to me is this is like between Burrich just trying to understand what Fitz is moping about, and Fitz is like, "I'm so alone," and and there the conversation ended with both of us looking at one another and neither understanding at all, which I feel like that's like lots of Burrich Fitz's dynamic is both of them having like such different experiences, and Burrich not knowing about all these secret parts of Fitz's life and just knowing him as like this silent mute boy who doesn't like
Who
talk that
might
much
be
and is like
stupid.
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like but I also think that like that's kind of like the beautiful part of their dynamic where it's like sometimes they don't need to understand each other to be there for each other, like at the end of this book where Birch has no clue what's going on but it's like, yo, I'm there for you, Fitz, let's do this. And then also later on Oslovjal where literally like Fitz comes running out of the snowstorm like a madman, like we need to kill the dragon, and we're just like, yeah, okay, we'll kill the dragon, we'll kill the dragon, my baby, and it's just like, yeah, he doesn't need to understand, he's just on board with Fitz, and I just love that.
It's what I feel like being a good parent is. It's being
Yeah.
there for your kid no matter what, even if you don't understand or like don't get the whole picture. And I feel like Birch has always been okay. He's not like the best parent, obviously, because he does get Fitz very drunk, but he does take care of him and like he's that safe space that Fitz can always come back to.
I live for the moments in this trilogy in particular where you realize how stupid people think Fitz is. Like,
Yeah,
Burrich is like, I thought you were slow.
I know. I love that.
I think it's so funny because
It's like
he's very smart. He just, his main form of interacting with the world prior to coming to Buckkeep was the wit and the skill, untrained. And so he just never talked to anybody.
He
I
didn't
feel
feel
like
the need.
to a certain degree he
Right.
almost assumes that other people has that up to a
Yeah.
certain point, he's just like it, like I think spoilers for later on in this thing, but like when he gets to like Neat Bay, I think like he's like oh, Shade, you can't feel this shit. You can't feel these people are not connected. He like I think he finally that's when it clicks. Like oh, like I knew that I had weird abilities, but like this is like it like really like set in at that point.
Yeah, it's like
And
when
I
he first comes into contact with Forge Ones, he is like, whoa, I've been interacting with the world in a very different way than everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a little snippet of that too when he goes down to Buckkeep Town for like the first time in a year and meets Nolly or Molly and he like quests out to her and I don't think
Mhm.
she like notices or responds or anything and that's when he gets like a little bit like everyone can't do this.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Um, I think like my last note before the knife thing is there's a line where Fitz is like it was comforting to be casually ignored. And like, yeah, it's basically just that's what Fitz wanted his whole life, and I think that's also why he appreciates his time with like the guardsmen or like the people in the kitchen because like yeah, they just treat him like anyone else. And that's
Yeah,
what he's
he's
wanted.
normal.
He's such
Hmm.
an introvert.
Hmm.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Right.
The last thing I had was a quote from Burrich right after he finished getting Fitz real nice and drunk. He said, "And tomorrow we'll go and do the same again and again until one day you get up and find that whatever it was didn't kill you after all." And I was just thinking about this and I'm like, this has to be how Burrich coped with chivalry leaving him for sure.
Yeah, or
Because,
breaking with patience.
yeah, I think both. Because we see Burrich drinking a lot at the beginning of the book. And that's like right after chivalry abdicates and Fitz is thrown on him. So I feel like that's his only way of like moving through the world. He's like, when stuff is tough, like you just drink and get through it.
Yep, it's his coping mechanism for sure because you see it later on too when he thinks Fitz is dead. He goes home to Molly just like hammered and Molly gets really mad at him. But that's his only way of like dealing with Birch is not an emotional person. So I think if he feels an emotion, he's just like drown it in alcohol.
Hmm.
But I
Yeah,
don't
really
think
learning
he
healthy
does
coping
that.
mechanisms from a young age.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't think that Burrich really does that when chivalry dies, though. Like, I think he just shuts off completely and
Yeah.
he's just like so numb to the world that he doesn't even need the drink to do it.
Yeah,
Hmm.
all I really remember is that Fitz says he cut his hair off and that he had like a black look in his eye that no one would go near him or talk to him. But yeah, we
Yeah.
don't see
Everybody
him
pitied
like,
him because Fitz even says, I have seen skulls with more life in their eye holes than
yeah,
Burrich had in his
in
eyes.
Birch. It's crazy.
It's because Burrich like feels defeated when we first meet him when chivalry abdicates, and it's just like there, there's rock bottom, and then there's whatever that was.
Whatever Burrich hits when chivalry is dead.
Yeah, God, I wish we got like a crumb of chivalry and Burrich interaction.
I know,
Just
it would
just
be
like a little
so
bit.
great.
I know. I am so. Chivalry is one of those characters that is just an enigma to me. I'm so fascinated, and I really want there to be a short story or something where we get to see him in action because he's such a powerful force. And this book in particular, like, mentions of him kind of trail off as the series go on. But in this book, he's almost another main character just via how frequently he's mentioned, but
Hmm.
you never actually see him. And it makes him such a mystery.
Hmm. That's kind of a perfect segue into the next chapter, Chivalry Shadow. But I think before
Yeah.
that, do we want to talk about the knife thing?
Yeah, I think the knife thing is important. This is like one of my favorite Fitz moments in the whole series. The fact that he just locks eyes with Shrewd and openly steals something, basically to say, fuck you for putting me up to this test and
Yeah.
messing with me. Like, I will take your knife. And then he goes in. And later on, just via Shade always leaving that knife there, that was a moment where Shade really, like, falls in love with Fitz. Like, he's basically saying fuck you both, but Shade gets all like sparkly eyed at it. Like this sassy kid just stole from the king and shoved a knife into my mantle to
Hmm.
tell me off.
Yeah, I
I
think it's
think
also
it's
just like there as a reminder, like I'm never gonna do that again. If I ever feel like I'm going
Mhm.
to manipulate Fitz that way,
yeah.
I
I
just have this
can't
constant
harm this
reminder.
boy.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's like still there when like I remember like Dutiful and Fitz and like Golden Fool, they're like there in that chamber. I think like
It's
that's
there.
one
I
of the things
think
that
like
Dutiful
the
is like,
last
yeah, I've always wondered why that's there or something. I don't remember. I think that's mentioned.
Yeah,
yeah, I
it's
think it's
definitely
there
like mentioned in passing and stuff for sure.
up to like the last trilogy too. And you know that Dutiful says something about I could never live up to the boy that Shade always talked about. He told me the boy like put the knife there, whatever, and it's like you were the boy. And you never know how special Fitz is to Shade until, at least for me, I never really realized until you hear how much like Fitz vigilant and dutiful strive to live up to this like enigma that's just boy that they don't know is really Fitz.
Mhm.
And
I
it's
think
very
yeah,
sweet.
and that coming on the heels of Shade being like, "You are not allowed to die," and it's just like Fitz, and it's like it's weird because also in that time like Shade is angry at Fitz because he thinks Fitz has like cheated him out of this like skill healing magic, but it's at that moment that Fitz is realizing how much Shade actually loves him. Yeah. Which is also why I love that line that happens at the same time where it's like, have you ever realized that there's someone that you love but you don't like very much at the present moment or something like that? Because I feel like it's going both ways with Shade and
Yeah,
Fitz.
definitely.
Fitz has so many people in his life that love him but never tell him. Like Molly is the only person really that tells him, which is
Open.
probably why he clings to her so much. But yeah, I mean, he thinks he's doesn't have anyone, but Burrich says later on, I loved him like a son, and Shade clearly loves him, especially after this exchange. But they're so close-lipped about it.
I think the only
It's
one
weird
who's
because you'd think that
somewhat
he'd like feel
open.
it out with the wit, but then it's just like I feel like that these kind of emotions are so deep and they're just kind of like stuff that happens over time that it's not like the surface level emotional thing that you get from the moment to moment with the wit.
I think the only other people who are somewhat open with their emotions towards Fitz are Patience when she like has a little freak out and she's like, "You were supposed to be mine, like you were supposed to be my child." And she like I think he's seen her as a mother ever since then. And then also Ketrican, but I think Ketrican he's so like oblivious to that because she doesn't say it,
He
but
also
everybody else knows.
Yeah, and he also always thinks of her as Verities, so he
Yeah,
just won't consider any other option. It's just like,
yeah,
that's Verities, so I can't, she doesn't exist to me in that regard.
I do not see it.
Yeah,
right.
he's so good at deluding himself. It's incredible.
Hmm. I mean, I guess that's also like a good transition too. Another person who cares a lot about about Fitz is the Fool, and he deludes himself about like the Fool's feelings towards him for such a long time. Yeah, and it's just like he's so bad at emotions for someone who should be really good at them, given that he has like two different types of magic to like
Yeah.
feel them out, and empathize in a way that normal people can't.
Right.
Okay. Do we have anything else to talk about with chapter 5? Or are we ready to move on to chapter 6, Chivalry Shadow?
I'm ready.
I'm ready for 6.
Okay. Does anyone else want to introduce this one?
To be honest, I read all of these last week, so I don't super remember like chapter by chapter what happens. So I'm not gonna do a good
That's fair.
job.
I read it like 2 days ago, so I'm down to just do a
Okay.
quick summary. So, in this chapter, like, there's this overarching theme of like, what what role will kind of like the influence of chivalry or chivalry shadow play on what Fitz can and can't do? And this starts off at the start of the chapter with Fedrin offering Fitz the opportunity to travel with him and be a scribe. He goes and talks to Shade, and Shade is like, "No, if you do that, you'll die because not everyone has forgotten that you're chivalry's like son." Um, and then kind of and then this continues to the end of the chapter where when Fitz is coming back from Buckkeep Town, we find out that Chivalry's dead. And there's kind of this thing of like, okay, like I'm gonna have this like shadow in my life, and I won't even ever get to meet the person who cast it, kind of thing.
Yeah, the part where Fedrin offers Fitz the apprenticeship and Shade just like immediately shuts it down. I feel like Shade is a little bit too honest with a child here. He's really, he doesn't hold back at all. He's just like, if you leave Buckkeep, you will be murdered just because of who you are. And
Also,
that's
like
not,
personal bitterness, I think, because he's like,
yeah, it's
Because
just like
yeah,
he's
not
been
something a
confined.
10-year-old should hear, even if it's true. And then, Fitz goes the rest of his whole life, and because of other things as well, but he's just constantly always paranoid, like, someone's going to kill me just because I am who I am. And he's getting this message as of like a 10-year-old. That's terrifying.
mhm. Yeah. Oh, let's see. At the start of the chapter, where it's like, uh, Fedrin goes boy, and like no one else turns around. It's like it's really showing how like Fitz's name and identity is becoming like the lack of one. He doesn't really have anyone in his life who like has given him that name. But I also think it's interesting in contrasting it to like the pre-chapter little blurb where Fitz is like, yeah, names don't mean shit. So like whatever, fuck you. And like I wonder how much of that is like
It might just
the
be
accurate thing
bitterness.
or like a little bit of like Fitz's feelings on it slipping in.
Well, he responds to that name even in the last trilogy. He's like 60, and someone will still call him boy and be like, me? So, that lack of
You're a
I
grown man, Fitz.
right. Right. It's just one of those, and that's a unique, like, I think if anyone else called him that outside of people that knew him in this time of his life, he would be like, don't.
Who the fuck are
You're
you to
not.
do this?
Yeah, he
Yeah.
keeps his like identities very separate. Like someone that usually calls him Tom calls him anything other than Tom, it makes him really uncomfortable. Or, there's like segmented parts of himself, and this boy that he is here is one of those pieces.
So yeah, I think one line that we like all called out is the thing of you're a royal bastard and you're a hostage to your bloodlines. And it's so sad because like this is it's what you said. It's true throughout like the rest of the series where it's like even to the point where he's no longer like actually hostage to it just because of the way he's been taught early on and like the kind of like family environment he had, he just always will believe that he can never be safe. Um, I also thought this line was interesting because like I feel like Shade could have just said bloodline here because like the Farseer bloodline, but the way that it says bloodlines, I don't think that this is like intentional, but like it just like pinged off like, oh yeah, also the wit and the skill, which makes him so unique and kind of like pushes his life in different ways. He's also
Well,
hostage to that unique
an
role.
another thing that I just thought of because you said that is bloodlines could be the fact that he's a bastard too. So he doesn't have
Mm.
that singular royal bloodline, and now he's a hostage to both bloodlines because he's not fully royal, but he's not fully just like regular everyday folk. So he is kind of stuck in this limbo.
We also don't know what his other bloodline is. So it's, interesting that he's from the mountains, and a big theme throughout this series is uniting the six duchies in the Mountain Kingdom. And he's kind of the catalyst for that, in that he's a child of both, even though he doesn't really know or realize or recognize that. He's kind of
Yeah.
the first, he's born, and then later on, it's triggered this marriage and alliance and eventual kind of annexation of the Mountain Kingdom. And it all comes from or stems from or is helped by his birth.
Mhm. But also, yeah, speaking of him not knowing or recognizing his like mountain heritage, he meets his mother in this chapter. It's like the one time we
I
see him meet his mother, and it's like
know.
Yeah.
it's like it's such a
The
like I
fact that
feel like
he doesn't recognize her is nuts.
yeah, I glossed over it the first time I read this book, and I'm like I had like the same reaction that Fitz did, where it's like, huh, weird. Anyways, but then
Yeah.
coming back, it's like, holy shit. Like, talk about misconnections. Like, and it's crazy because he just walks away with Molly. It's like less than a
He's,
page.
he so quickly is just like, well, Molly. Whereas you'd think a different person would stop and ask, or be like, do I know you? And it's almost like deep down he doesn't want to acknowledge or think about it. So the first distraction, he's like, well, I have to move on. Whatever.
Well, and also you would think that he would recognize his childhood name, even though
Yeah.
it says at the beginning, like, everything up until I was 6, like, is a blur. But don't you think he would,
You'd
like,
think it
find
would
some
ring a little
familiarity
bit
in it?
of an alarm. Yeah. Because he says, there's a line I wrote out here. He says it was a racial heritage both strange and oddly familiar to me, and a shiver walked down my back when I suddenly knew she was from the mountains. So he knows deep down, and something's like firing off in his brain, but he doesn't recognize directly his mother or the name that she's calling him. He's just clueless about that. It's very strange.
I feel like it might just be another instance of Fitz self-delusion where he's like, well, we
Yep.
don't have time to unpack all of that. He just turns away.
Yeah, let's go see Molly.
Yep.
Hmm.
Definitely.
The thing that hit me was that Fitz loses his mother and his father in one chapter. Like, this is the last time that he has any encounter whatsoever with his mom, and then he finds out that Chivalry's dead as well, so he, like, is fully an orphan now, kind of.
That never occurred to, I never put that together before. Yeah, that's super interesting that both of these things happen in this the same day, really. Because is it the same
Yeah.
day that he's
It's
walking?
within, like, maybe 8 hours.
Right. Yeah.
God. And it's like there's definitely like a whole story like why his mother is there because like like I think like the first time I read this, I'd completely forgotten that like Buckkeep was a separate place from where they started off the story. But like yeah, this is like several days like hard riding away from where they started. So like I feel like
It,
his mother must have come to try and find him, right? Or
Yeah,
something like
that
I
or
was
think
my assumption.
I think she came under the disguise of or the guise of, like, I'm just gonna sell my goods with I was assuming it was, like, her mother or, like, some, like, close person from the Mountain Kingdom that the old lady that, like, Fitz bought whatever he bought from her.
Hmm.
I think she, like, pretended like, "Oh, yeah, I'm just gonna go and help trade and, like, take care of all this stuff with you," in the hopes that she would end up seeing Fitz. And also, I wonder how long she's been there. Like, how many years has she come to Buckkeep trying
Looking.
to find him in the hopes that, like, maybe one day he would show up?
And why doesn't she continue? Like, does something happen? Because the last you see of her, she's fully having a meltdown and freaking out and trying to get to him, and there are like guards and whatever. So, you know, either she's like, clearly he doesn't want anything to do with me and she just goes back home, or somehow they never have an encounter like this again, even though she's looking for him, or something happens to her after this moment, which is
I
possible
think something
considering,
happens to her.
yeah,
Mhm.
like
And
it's very,
I wonder even if, like, the royals had something to do with it. Like, I wonder if Shade caught wind that some lady was out here trying to get Fitz's attention, and he said, "Oh, we can't have Fitz's loyalty be questioned, so let's just quietly make this disappear."
That's
think Shade wouldn't do that. Like,
I
even
think
on
Shrewd would, though.
Shrewd would up
Shrewd
100%.
would. Shrewd
And if
absolutely would.
Shrewd knew because of Shade's spy network, there's no
Yeah.
doubt that he would have done it.
Mm-hmm. God. Yeah, and it's like I mentioned this last chapter, but it's like for a series with like so many answers, that like later on, the moments where we don't really have any context, it's just like that much more compelling. It's like,
Yeah,
I can't just read on and find out what happens.
Yeah, I think if I'm remembering correctly, someone asked Robin Hobb about this, like, why don't we do we get answers about Fitz's mom, or why don't we get answers? And she was just like, in life, you don't get answers to things sometimes, and that's so true. Like he has this encounter, and as readers, we're grasping at it because it's one little glimpse we get into the life he had before he was 6, and we never know more. But that's the way that life is. You would likely never know more. It'd just be like a weird thing that happened once that you never get closure or more detail about.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of love that she does that because I just lost what I was going to say.
I love it, but at the same time, I hate it a little bit because I'm like, I'm confused enough in real life. I'm reading so that I cannot be confused. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
be in a magical story. So I don't want real life constraints all the time, but it's it makes it feel more tangible for sure, I
Yeah.
think.
It does
Mm-hmm.
feel real because everything doesn't always wrap up in a nice little bow like we expect from stories because that's how they usually are. And these
Right.
ones, it's like, this is real life. Like, these are real people.
Yep.
Yeah, I feel like lots of times authors use that kind of justification to just do shitty storytelling, where they're like, "Yeah, in real life, everything doesn't get wrapped up," and it's like, "No, you're just
Right.
fucking lazy." Like, but in this one, it's like we don't need to know some of these things for it to still have an emotional impact, for it to serve its role in the story, and
Yeah.
so it
Well, and we know
there's
it's
like
not.
plot put to it. Hmm?
Yeah, we know it's not laziness too because with her specifically, so many things do get answered and do end up making sense. You just have to read like 12 more books down the line.
Yeah.
So when she doesn't tie something up, it feels very intentional rather than like a slip up or a plot hole.
Hmm. Okay. Other lines that I thought were worth mentioning from this chapter. Um, when Fedrin offers Fitz the apprenticeship, he's like, "I had never thought of anyone finding me companionable," and I'm like, "No,
That poor
like,
baby.
poor baby." And like like again, like it feels like I feel like Robin Hobb like kind of like subtly structures these chapters in a really. I mentioned this later on in my notes, but like she has like a really good way of like chapters having like overarching themes or like things coming back within the chapters that I didn't realize when I first read, and I kind of dismissed it. But reading back, it's like, oh. And the reason I mentioned that for this quote is because he meets Molly later on in this chapter, and it's like there's obviously a very companionable relationship between the two.
I didn't even think about that. Or like think to make that connection. But poor Fitz. I feel
I
so
know.
sad for him like all the time.
I do too.
Um, Another line which I thought was pretty cool is um, Shade is kind of criticizing or like judging Verity. And he's like, he would rather hunt Winterbuck or listen to a minstrel by the fireside than travel winter roads in raw weather. And I'm like, joke's on you, motherfucker. He actually does end up doing that. He travels all the way to the Elderling city or whatever. And it's like, I feel like everyone in the series, or at least people in the royal family adjacent, they always like underestimate Verity. And I feel like lots of that is due more to his status as like second in line to the throne than any quality of his own. Because like
Yeah.
his one downfall is that he's a bit blunt and awkward, but like he still has like the respect of the soldiers. He still has like lots of the skills that we're told chivalry has. And I feel like people like Shade who are supposed to be perceptive just kind of like overlook that because they're like, oh yeah, he was the second in line. He's going to be no chivalry.
I noted that line as well because I was like, this is some pretty heavy foreshadowing here. And then it made me feel really sad for Verity because I think that is true. He would rather, I mean, he hates that he's king in waiting. Like, he doesn't like the
He
pressure.
never wanted that.
He never wanted it. He just wants to be able to, like, do his own thing and hunt and be a soldier. But then once he has to take on that burden, he's not afraid, or maybe he is afraid, but he's willing to do the hard things, which is sacrificing a story by the fireside to hike up into the mountains pretty much by yourself and be alone and cold all the time.
And when you were
And he
talking
does
about
it
that, it
without
actually
even
made me think.
thinking. He doesn't complain about it or anything. He's just like,
Right.
this is
He's
what I
like,
need
this
to
is,
do.
yep.
He takes it like a soldier, I think. Because the soldier that like Fitz's grandpa dumps him on is just like, well, this is how it is. And I feel like Verity is like, this is my life now.
Yep.
Mhm. And yeah, one thing that I thought of while you're mentioning that is that like he wouldn't have actually been able to like in the end do his duty if he hadn't had like those hunts or listening to the minstrel by the fireside because it's his wealth of life experiences that ends up making the dragon whole. And it's also like it was interesting for me to think about because I wonder if like the reason that past coteries and kings have failed is because they have like such a one note or sheltered life that they don't have that wealth of experiences to be able to put into the dragon.
I think a lot of them failed too because they were trying to maintain their lives. Like, I'll put half of me into the dragon, but I still want to be here. And Verity recognizes that he has to give his entire
He
being
needs to
and
go
self.
fully into the dragon.
Right.
Mhm.
Something that I found strange, like I didn't notice it before, is that Fitz calls Regal Sir at the end of the chapter when Verity and Regal stop because they see Fitz on the side of the road. He says something to him, like Regal says something to him and always addresses Fitz as bastard, and Fitz addressed Regal as Sir. And I don't know if that was because he was startled by like seeing them two there or if like it's just his manners or something. But
I
it was so
wonder if it
strange
was,
to me.
yeah, I wonder if it was almost like tiptoeing around a bully. Like, I'm just gonna call him the respectful thing
And
so
hope he
that,
doesn't mess with me anymore.
yeah, so that maybe he'll leave me alone. But yeah, I didn't pick that out. It's very interesting that he addressed him at all, because usually he'll just be like, I tried to avoid Regal or not talk to him if I could. But it's also after he kind of yells at him for bringing the horse to a stop so quickly.
Yeah.
I think he's like, shit, I shouldn't have like told
This is
Regal.
royalty.
Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of wondered, do you guys think that Regal was so startled by seeing Fitz there because he had something to do with Chivalry's death, or he kind of knew that something was happening about that and he kind of like not felt guilty, but like it weighed heavily on him and he like that's what he was thinking about, so he immediately thought that Chivalry's ghost had come back to haunt him? Or do you think it was just like we just learned that our brother was dead and we saw his ghost, so like it's scary?
Well, Verity seemed as startled as Regal, but I do also think that Regal could have had something to do with
Mhm.
Chivalry's downfall.
Yeah,
I think maybe
I
he
think
didn't
it's that like
do anything, but his mom probably talked with him about it, and she was like, "This is what I'm
Right.
planning on doing."
Right. Like maybe he didn't have a direct hand in it, but he knew about it. Like he didn't seem surprised, you know, whereas Verity seemed
He seemed like he was,
Shock.
Verity seemed like he was in shock.
And shock. Yeah, Regal was just like, whatever. We have to bring
Why
a
are
new
you telling him this? He shouldn't know about this before the king even knows.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
Which, like, I think if anyone but Regal had said that, I'd been like, yeah, that's fair, that's true. Like, maybe we should be a little bit more
But
circumspect.
the
But since it's Regal, I'm like,
snappy way
fuck
that he
you.
says shit.
This is the only time I'll ever agree with Regal, though, when he's like, "You are such an idiot, Verity." Because,
He's not wrong.
like, what a way
I
to
mean, yeah, that's his
tell.
flaw. He's too blunt for his own good.
Yeah.
He is too honest.
Like, you just tell this kid his dad's dead by being like, "Ha ha ha, I thought you were a ghost."
Hmm.
But I think he kind of makes up for it when Fitz is like, my father's dead, and Verity says, yeah, my brother has passed. And he's tying that familial relationship a little bit tighter. And I think
Yeah.
that's his way of kind of being like, sorry I spilled the beans like this.
Yep.
Hmm.
And
I think I have
seeing,
two other things to say in this chapter. Oh, sorry.
yeah, I have one quick thing. Seeing Verity and Regal together like that, I always assumed that Regal was a lot younger. Like, I thought like 10 years younger than Verity and Chivalry, but seeing them interact like that, I kind of thought that they, like, reading it now, it seems like they were closer in age. So, like, maybe only 3 or 4 years difference. What do you guys think the age difference is between the three brothers?
I think Regal's probably somewhere in between Fitz and Verity, age-wise.
So
Well,
he's like
obviously
kind of the
somewhere in
middleman.
between, but yeah, like kind of in the middle between those two. Because when Fitz is like 6, it seems like Regal's probably a teenager. So
Yeah,
maybe if there's a 10-year age gap between Fitz and Regal. But I don't think Regal's all of 29 by Assassin's Quest. He seems younger than that.
yeah.
So
I think like
it's
a
that
6 to 7 year
again.
age difference, maybe.
Yeah. Yep.
But
And
like, it's
then I
also
was
because like he's he's like around Ketrican's age from what they say at the end of this book, but like
Yeah.
slightly older. So
well, and I
One
would
thing,
think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
go ahead.
I would think at the end of Assassin's Quest, Verity's probably in his like early 30s, and I would guess Regal is mid 20s. So probably 10 years or a little less.
Yeah. I think another thing that like showed kind of their age differences, Verity and Chivalry knew Shade. They kind of had a relationship with him, and Regal had nothing. Like, I think Shade was already kind of in hiding from everybody by the time Regal was either born or like conscious enough to start remembering stuff.
Yeah, you get the sense that Chivalry and Verity had a very different childhood than Regal, and that's why those two were so close because they grew up together. And if
Yeah,
Regal wasn't all that much younger than them, then I think there would have been more unification between the three brothers. But it's very segmented. Like there's these two, and then there's Regal. So I think there had to have been a significant gap.
yeah.
mm, okay. So I guess the last two things I want to talk about for this chapter. The first thing, I think it's incredibly cute how Shade is like secretly organizes Fitz to have like a day on the town because Fitz is like, "Ah, I love the town. No one there judges me, and I feel so trapped." And Shade is probably like, yeah, this kid needs a break. So just yeah, Fedrin needed some stuff, and like it's obviously like organized so that it sends him all over, so he gets to
Yeah,
explore.
so he gets a familiarity with the whole town. He knows how to get stuff and where things come.
And this
Mhm.
was right after he had asked to be an apprentice and expressed interest in seeing new places and stuff. And shortly after he expresses this to Shade, he not only gets this day to run around the town, but he gets a mission with Verity that takes him to Neat Bay. So it's like a subtle way of Shade being like, I know you can't be a scribe's apprentice, but here's an opportunity to get out of Buck, which is really nice. But he does it in a way that like a kid wouldn't recognize. So then, like, just tell him you're doing a nice thing. Come on.
He's too
I
wrapped up in
know. Everyone's
secrets.
gotta be so quiet with their good deeds.
Right.
hmm And the last thing I want to talk about in this chapter was the line, "For a moment I thought of setting my basket down and running away, running off into the darkness and never coming back. Would anyone ever come looking for me?" I feel like this, like, it's not like the last line in the chapter, but like it's close enough that like I really like how it ties together like the two themes, which is like one, will I ever be able to escape Chivalry's shadow? Will I, like, now that he's dead, will people stop caring about me? And two, like, would anyone ever come looking for me? There's kind of like this plaintive feeling to it where it's like, will
Does
people care
anybody
if I'm
care about
gone?
me? Does anybody
Yeah.
love me?
So like, hmm and I think obviously his choice to just go back to the castle is like it's the answer to both of those questions that the chapter poses. I think, yeah, it's cool. Yeah. Do we have anything else before we want to move on to chapter 7?
I do not.
Yeah, not me.
Okay. So chapter 7 is an assignment. Um, and there's like basically this is where he gets his mission to go to Neat Bay. And there's like lots of little stuff that happens in this chapter for like preparing for that. So I don't know how to summarize that. So I'm just gonna say, yeah, he gets his job to he's told that he's going to Neat Bay and that he might have to kill.
I have
Um,
thoughts about the intro in this chapter. Um,
yes.
it's all about Queen Desire's death, which I'm assuming happens around this time. Um, but whoever is writing the intro, which I would assume is Fitz, but it never really says that directly. Like the intros here are different than like the prologue that's obviously Fitz writing. The intros are oftentimes by other people or they're, part of a story or whatever. And seldom is it in first person, the intros, but this one is, and they say they know that Desire's death was not Shrewd's doing. But, like, who is the writer and how do they know that? Who knows Shrewd that well that they would know for a fact that this wasn't his doing?
I mean, who's so blindly loyal to Shrew that they couldn't imagine him doing that? I think only Fitz.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
also Fitz sees how he's let Desire just kind of go off and do what she wants to do all the time. So he knows that Shrewd probably would never do something like that.
Yeah. I
Mhm.
wish it was Shrewd.
It would have been nice.
Mhm. Guys, I totally didn't kill Queen Desire. I'm here to let you know.
Well, I get the sense, I think it might be, oh, it is in this chapter where Shade is almost insinuating that Shrewd could have had a hand in Chivalry's death. And it's like, if Shrewd was willing to possibly kill Chivalry, why wouldn't he be willing to kill Desire? Like Shade says in this chapter, I think they must first convince Shrewd it's necessary about killing Fitz, but then he's talking about Chivalry's death and he says, I knew nothing of it before it happened. I had no hand in it in any way. And he says something about, I would have put a stop to it. And the only way Shade would have been told is if Shrewd was involved, because I don't know that Desire knows about Shade, and Regal definitely doesn't know about Shade.
Mhm.
So I don't know. It felt like he was insinuating Shrewd either was involved or could have been involved, which is a big time bummer if that's the case.
I feel like he's trying more to make Fitz aware of
The danger.
like how he shouldn't trust the queen and how the queen can be actually dangerous and she's not just all talk. Because I feel like I think that if Shrewd knew about her plans to do that, he would have stopped her,
Well, I
right?
also wonder the timing is coincidental, maybe? Like, is her death in retaliation, even if it wasn't by Shrewd's doing? Because Chivalry dies, and then the next chapter we get an intro about Desire dying by poison, drugs, whether self-inflicted or not. So, I don't know. I heavily suspect that her death was not just like an overdose, even though that's the official word.
Mhm.
Well, I think we kind of see her habits reflected in Regal and how Regal just kind of parties all the time and like doesn't really care about taking care of himself because he just wants all the drugs and like the incense and all that stuff. So maybe it was kind of just her like going overboard all the time
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel
because
like
I'm sure
we're
that it can
supposed
take a
to
big toll.
assume. I feel like I almost feel like the intro, in some ways, is Robin Hobb like leaning out of the page and being like, "I'm telling you straight up, don't have to speculate about this. Desire murked herself. Like it was not like
Yeah.
the."
I just think the timing is suspect.
Mhm. I mean, I could definitely see like I could see it being like shrewd as like, oh, Desire's a liability, but and like not like
And
killing
maybe
her
not
explicitly, but,
stopping
like
her
have
so
some
much.
more.
Right.
He's
Like
like,
yeah.
"No, don't do that.
Well,
You shouldn't do that." But like he's like, it's fine because she'll die
normally
soon.
I would suspect Shade, but I don't think Shade at this point in the story is willing to do something outside of what Shrewd tells him to do directly. Like, I think
Yeah.
later on,
And
versions
that's
of Shrewd
treason
probably
for
would, but
sure.
yeah, that's true.
Mhm.
He would be killing the queen. And he will not do anything against Regal because it's the royal family.
Mhm.
So that would probably extend to Desire as well.
Do you
Right.
think he does it because it's the royal family or because Regal's family? Like
Like
part of
blood.
Shade's family. Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
Shay just. I feel like it's the royals. He talks about how important the Farseers are to like the kingdom or whatever. Like he's almost fanatical about how important and like he cares about family, but I also think it's like I think with Regal it's like a strictly business thing. I don't think he likes Regal. I don't think he feels like any sort of kinship. It's not like Verity and Chivalry, where he knew them when they were kids.
Yeah, they were his
Yeah.
nephews.
You cannot like family members and still feel a sense of like
That's
loyalty to
actually
them.
fair. That's
Yeah.
fair. I just
I-
I guess I never got that sense of like kinship.
right.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like
Ooh,
just
okay.
Shade just not dealing with Regal makes me so mad. It's just like literally
Fitz,
everything in the series could like all of the conflict could be stopped as like if they just deal with Regal. Doesn't even have to kill him. You don't even have to kill him. You don't even have to like permanently harm him. Just like bonk him on the head and be like bad.
and
Don't
so
do
many
that.
times Fitz like begs them. Like Fitz tells Shade like this is a problem. He is a problem. Something needs to be done about Regal. And Shade's just like he's a prince. So no. So frustrating.
But then whoever it was had no problem offing chivalry. And
Right.
he used to
It's
be
not
king in
doing anything.
waiting.
He was just living his life in Withy Woods. He, once he
But he
abdicates,
was a liability, I
yeah,
guess.
yeah. I, there's a lot of hypocrisy going on.
Hmm.
Definitely.
We get the first real tangible interaction with Fitz and the Fool in this chapter, and I think it's hilarious that they both think the other one is a total moron.
And it's
And
coming, it's
the
right on
fool
the
gets
heels
so
of Burrage
annoyed.
Fitz being like, oh, Burrage thinks I'm an idiot because I don't talk. And it's like, maybe if you maybe could have reflected on that and be like, the things that come out of people's mouths or don't come out of people's mouths does not reflect their intelligence. And Fitz just like walks into the fool and is like, nah, I'm just gonna make this assumption.
Yeah, he like talks slowly to him and everything. And one thing that I interpreted differently on this read than other reads is the first couple times I read it, I thought the fool was saying all these different versions of what he actually says, the fat suffices thing. But on this read, and I don't know which way is correct, but on this read, I interpreted it as that's what Fitz is hearing all those other times. And the fool's really saying the whole riddle the whole time, but Fitz just isn't piecing out the words correctly until like the end of that.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well. That Fitz is just
Yeah.
like syllables.
Yeah. Yep. Like she's typing it, or Fitz is writing it the way he heard it, and each time another word kind of slides into place until he gets the whole riddle, which I'm not gonna say because I will say it wrong because it's a tongue twister.
I feel like this
It's
is like
all
the
after.
only like true
Yeah.
like prophecy that the fool gives out. The
He gets so annoyed when Fitz doesn't get it. He like rolls his eyes, and I love it so much.
Mhm. It feels so weird for how the fool is characterized later that I almost feel like maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like the fool is almost like purposely trying to be aloof. Like, yeah, here's my prophecy. Like, I don't care about you, but like, yeah,
Well,
just take the prophecy and go.
you see it later when Dee has prophecies. It's almost like she's possessed for a second. Like she has to spit it out, she has to say it, and she'll act really weird. And then you get from her perspective that it's like an out of body experience. So it could be that the fool is just like getting this out, and then the dream portion kind of fades away, and Fitz still isn't getting it. He's like, ugh, that suffices. Come on.
Mhm. I also love the
And what
line
I
here.
love, oh, sorry,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was just gonna say, there's a line where I'm a fool, not an interpreter of dreams, and I'm like, all you do is interpret dreams.
That's exactly what I was just going to talk about. Because he does it for himself and B.
Hmm.
Yeah. It was just yeah, that's just like yeah, it's just ironic and funny. Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, going back earlier in the chapter, where Burrich is like, "We have to teach you your manners because you're going to Neat Bay." Um, I loved the lines, "I'm going to teach you manners today with horses." Like that shit cracked me up. I like Fitz is like, yes, I need to communicate with the horses."
With
Um,
horses.
I also love the line, melting silently away was not polite." I'm just imagining like Fitz like trying to tippy toe away and Bert's like, no.
Yeah, like if
But,
he walks into a room and it's too crowded, he just kind of leaves. And Birch is like, you can't be doing that.
hmm yeah. And I guess like the last line from that little interaction was, I realized what a blow to his pride and reputation I realized what a blow to his pride and reputation it would be if I vanished. And it's like, no, you fucking idiot. He doesn't care about you because of his pride and reputation. He cares if you'd vanish or die because like you're his son,
Mhm.
effectively. And it's like, oh.
Fits the way that his logic works. Like, I have depression, and the way Fitz's logic works is very similar to like my experience with that particular mental illness. And I don't want to be like diagnosing book characters without a doctorate, but I would guess, or I can like akin my experiences to that way of thinking. And
Mhm.
without someone overtly telling Fitz, like, no, I don't want you to die because I love you and you are like a son to me. He's just like, well, it must be because it'll be a blow to his pride or whatever. Like Fitz needs somebody to tell him, and Birch just pretty much never does. Like he finds out secondhand or by like sitting in the wall listening to Birch talk to Ketrican about things, but Birch never says it to his face until like the very, very end of his
Oh, it's
life.
almost too late. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's pretty much too late. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And Fitz definitely has depression. I guess I also have depression, but like I think it's also just like even I feel like you don't even need to have depression to like recognize the symptoms in Fitz, especially as the trilogy goes on, because it's like
And Elf Bark doesn't help.
yeah,
Yeah,
Elfbark
that's
doesn't
what I was
help, and
just
it's
gonna
like
say. It definitely makes everything worse.
He has depression and then he takes the depression drug a bunch.
oh yeah, and he has the depression magic because he's always like skilling, and he's like I feel connected with no one. I should join the skill current, and it's like cool,
Yeah.
cool, love it. Yeah, I remember like this is completely tangential, but there was like someone on like the subreddit who's like, these days people are like interpreting the book about like depression, and it's just like you're just seeing that through your lens, and I'm like, I feel like you have to be completely atextual to like see Fitz, if not depressed, as like his
He's definitely
experiences
not
as like
neurotypical.
yeah, I I don't get how someone can read Fitz and be like, yeah, this is like a well-adjusted person who has like who doesn't have any issues they need to work through, and it's just yeah. So so like that perspective baffled me because I'm like, sure you can say it's not like like because I can understand like saying that like Fitz's character is more than his depression because it obviously is, but I think
Yeah.
denying that that's a part of his character is just like yeah again it just feels so atextual to me. Yeah. What else do you guys have to say about this chapter? I think that was all of my stuff.
I said everything.
So I've got a couple random things. So what do you guys think about Burrich and Vixen? Because the way that she mourns Chivalry's death definitely makes me think that she's not just like a dog that runs around. Like I think that they have that connection.
I think they 100% do. And the reason I think this is because I'm remembering a conversation that I believe is in Tawny Man where Fitz straight up asks, "Were you and Vixen?" And Burrich pretty much confirms it. And Fitz is like, "You're a hypocrite." And he's like, "Well, I couldn't help it." And, you know, like, he somehow justifies, like, he doesn't think it's a
I think he's like, I wanted you to be a better man than I was.
than I was. Yeah,
Probably.
like, it's okay for me to do it because I'm shit.
I'm lowly and I'm like just a
I didn't
stable
want you to do
master.
it. Yeah, like, I
Because
think
you're royal blood.
I think they're definitely bonded, and you see that in Vixen's reaction and Vixen's ability to like. There are times where Vixen is taking care of Fitz, and
Yeah, when he had that really, really awful week of Shade shunning him, and Vixen stays with him. I think Birch put her there and was like, so that we both can keep an eye on him.
in a regular master dog situation, wouldn't like if I tried to convey to my dog to go hang out with somebody else, he'd be like, no. So, but Night Eyes did that for Ketrican when it's asked him or told him to. So I think Burrich definitely was like, go stay with him, keep an eye on him so that I can keep an eye on him through you. And he's such a hypocrite. Like, I hate Burrich.
Yeah. I think other things that support Vixen being bonded are like how much Birch mourns her when she eventually dies, and also when I think it's Cobb, right? When Cobb tries to assassinate Birch later, they specifically lock up Vixen in his room, which I think like you could just say like, okay, it's just because it's a dog, but also like Nosy is there and they don't bother like locking him up. And also like Birch manages like a lot of dogs. So I feel like there's at least there's at least that feeling at that point. I think it's also because Galen kind of suspects that Birch is like witted because of like the relationship between him and Fitz. So like there's at least some other people sussing out that there might be a connection between Vixen and Birch, is how I read that.
I think if they heavily suspected that, they would have just used it as an excuse to get rid of Burridge.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I think it
Or
might
they
have
could
been
have
more of like
killed.
suspicion.
I think
They
they're
could
just
have
afraid of
killed
him.
Vixen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I think they're just scared of him because he's beats
Honestly,
the
why
shit out
didn't
of
they kill
people.
Vixen? Because like they were not afraid of killing
They
dogs. They
killed,
just
yeah, they killed Smithy.
yeah. Maybe it's just like yeah. Maybe they're
They
like
did a
it'll be
bad
less
job of
commotion.
everything.
But like
They
yeah.
didn't kill Burridge. They just did a bad job. It was a bad assassination attempt.
Yeah, Cobb needed I needed to be an apprentice to someone. Real shit assassin over there.
Yeah. And I wonder if he didn't kill Vixen because he like helped take care of her for a couple years.
Could be.
But
Yeah,
he was
Maybe
maybe.
he
also
felt
like
that
Burridge was
connection.
like he also I guess like should have felt that connection to Burridge, but then that relationship soured.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but dogs are more likable than people are, no matter who the
Oh,
people are.
absolutely.
Okay, fine, fair. Hmm. Which is also why I think Night Eyes is most people's favorite character in the series.
Yeah.
Yeah. What other stuff did you have, Alex?
The last thing I had was a quote. I think Shade says it after Fitz is like, why didn't chivalry, like, why did I never meet him? Like, why didn't he come back to see me and all that stuff? And Shade says, you've never seen a wild bird lure predators away from its young by pretending to be injured. And, like, I wonder if chivalry did that even before Fitz came to, like, Buckkeep. Like, I know we talked about this last episode. Like, did he know all along and he was always trying to protect Fitz? Or did he just do it after he abdicated the throne and like left?
Probably like a 50-50. I'm like I'm never sure with chivalry because again we don't know what's going
Yeah.
on with him. And I think again the things that the only people we hear about him from are people who would be like well disposed to him anyways. So it's just like
Yeah, that's true.
mhm. I feel like honestly my opinion on that depending on what day you ask me that question, it's just like that volatile. Um, but yeah, I mean, and I guess these last things are like not much to discuss per se, but it's just like this chapter ends with we get the first mention of the Red Ship Raiders because Shade is like, I don't get their deal, and then he also confirms that Fitz might have to do a murder, and Fitz is like, wow, I was 13, crazy.
So we get another mention of his age.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's really like I feel like we these like landmarks are like few and far between. So it's always like, we have a benchmark. We can like compare this to all the other stuff.
Yeah, you get like one per book or per trilogy.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Oh,
pretty much.
Yeah. With that, everyone good to move on to chapter 8?
Yeah.
Okay, so this chapter is called Lady Time. And this is a pretty, I believe it's a pretty short chapter. It's kind of just like we are traveling to Neat Bay. And it's all about Fitz and what's the name of? Starts with a H. What's his Hands?
Hands.
Just kind of dicking around and like, oh, Lady Time is horrible to travel with. And all I can think about is like one, poor Shade because he only gets to leave Buckkeep like heavily disguised, and he has to stay in like this in like what do you call like a palanquin I guess you'd call it.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, I bet Shade had so much fun just tormenting Hands and Fitz, and it's just like he. I feel like especially from what we see of Shade like later on in life, he is kind of a diva, kind of a dramatic person.
He's
So I
such a
feel like
drama
this
queen.
absolutely fits him.
I
I
think
didn't
it's
even think about it like that.
yeah, I think it's cute in this chapter also to see Fitz just be able to like hang out and play with a friend. Like he talks about kind of wrestling with Hands and like gossiping and laughing.
Yeah,
And it's just cute to see him be a kid.
because he has not been a kid since I think the beginning of the book for sure.
Basically,
It's
yeah,
kind of,
except
and
for
he's
running.
been around adults. So like this is the first time we kind of see him around someone his own age.
Mhm. And then it makes
Well,
it really
besides like
sad later on when Hans is like scared of him because they have this like bonding experience and this trip and they're close. And Hans knows who he is. Like it's the first kid his age that knows who he is and still is treating him like a kid.
yeah, and like a friend.
Yeah. Yep.
It shows like how deep the kind of prejudice against the wit exists. But also seeing
It's
someone come back from the
also
dead is pretty scary.
yeah, I
But
wonder sometimes if it's the wit or the fact that, like, if you straight up thought someone was dead and they were, like, buried and all of a sudden they're like, it's okay, it's me, you would be freaked out, like, no
mhm.
Oh,
matter what.
for sure. No doubt about that.
It assumes it's about the wit, but I don't know for sure that it totally is. It
It's
could
just
be.
basically a
And I
freaking
know Hands
zombie
like
for
I know Hands like
everyone.
Yeah.
shouts out like beast magic like
Oh,
when
he
he's running
does.
away.
Oh, I
But
forgot.
it's also like but I also agree that like it's beast magic scary because Fitz came back from the dead. And also I think
Like,
he's also probably like covered in blood by that point because he was doing a bunch of assassinating.
He
yeah,
did do
isn't
a
he,
lot
like,
of murders.
shirtless and covered in blood or something? Like, he takes his shirt off?
Well, and like that is kind of part of the like superstitions or misconceptions about the wit is that like it turns you into like a beast and you like kill for the pleasure of killing or something like that. So
Mhm,
maybe he definitely thinks it's like the wit has made Fitz crazy.
mhm. Yeah, and I think all like you were mentioning earlier how like Fitz is scared about coming out and like just being like I'm Fitz. And I think like all these like little interactions is what does it.
Yep, he says
Like
that to Hans, and Hans freaks out, and then he's like, "Oh shit."
mhm.
My
Um
biggest note for this chapter was I'm just very impressed with Fitz. He is kind of just doing his own thing and doing whatever, but at the same time, he's eavesdropping the whole time and it manages to put these pieces together and figure out what's really the issue. With these watchtowers not being manned, and it's something neither Verity nor Shade are able to do. Because I think it's like the next chapter or the chapter after, maybe, where Fitz reports to him, and Shade is like really impressed. And
mhm,
he has no training, really. Like, Shade tells him to listen and to figure out what he can figure out, but it's a relatively unrefined talent, and he manages to basically not only secure what the issue is, but solve it
mhm.
by
Yeah, and
himself
it's
at his
like
own.
uh it's interesting because like I know like lots of people like we mentioned earlier like think Fitz is stupid because he's very mute, but I think also because of that he has like this he's gaining an ability to like listen and perceive what's going on around him by keeping silent. Also, like to what you're saying about like Verity and Shade not being able to put it together at the end of this chapter, he's like Verity doesn't see the whole picture. Like you can force someone to do it, but that doesn't mean that they can like do it well. I think I think it's actually at the start of chapter 7 where Shade is um like the role of good government is to interfere in the people's affairs in a way that makes them act in a way that you don't ever have to do it. So basically the idea that like royal intervention is so obnoxious or whatever that they and the way that you resolve it, it makes it so that people want to stay in line. But I think Verity's thing is just like kind of the heavy-handed approach to that, while Fitz is like, yeah, just make them care about you, and therefore make them like, yeah, you get the picture. I don't know how to word that. Also speaking of Verity, I love how much he cares about Leon, and is just like he's like, oh, I'm a little embarrassed about how much I care about my little dog.
I
And
know,
again,
it's
I wish
so
that like
cute.
him and Fitz get more time to interact because I feel like they're both dog people. They would and I feel like Verity would have been able to comfort Fitz over like the death of Smithy and Nosy and all that because he'd like get it. Because even though he's not witted, he's like he cares about his dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Another thing I loved in this chapter was how, like, helpful and kind Cherim, is that his name?
Mhm.
I think so.
Verity's man. I loved how nice he was to Fitz, and he kind of just treated Fitz like a regular person too. But I mean, obviously, like as if Fitz was higher status than him, and just how like I don't know, he just treated Fitz like a normal person rather than like the royal bastard and like this kind of like embarrassment to the crown. And I loved that.
Yeah, every time someone just treats Fitz as Fitz,
Mm-hmm.
it hits me right here.
Yep. That's all I had for that chapter.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think this was
same.
kind of a quick one,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mhm.
not much happened.
Pretty much, it's just like we're on the road. We arrived.
Yep.
Okay. So the next chapter, chapter 9, fat suffices. Dun, dun, dun. Um, and like the chapter title hints back at the prophecy, and the pre-chapter blurb really hammers it in. It's just like, hey, the fool, not completely human, may have like supernatural lineage. Um, they prophecies may be legit. Keep an eye on him. If you haven't figured that out already, the fool is important, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this chapter is basically we see the prophecy come to pass with Fitz helping Lady Grace's dog, and ends up potentially solving the situation in Neat Bay. But by the time he gets a chance to actually, um, I guess he can't rest on his laurels because there's something going on at Forge. So him and Shade have to go racing off to solve that.
I never noticed before on other reads, but the intro says something about the fool's gender being disputed. I might have noticed and it just didn't like lock into my brain until this read, but I remember always being surprised when Starling brings it up. And it's mentioned here, like right away in the first book, that their gender is disputed.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to overlook it on a first read because it's like
Mm-hmm. Well,
yeah,
Fitz,
they say the gender's disputed, but then Fitz always refers to the fool
yeah,
as he, and so does
Fitz is
most
so
other
convinced.
people. Hmm.
Right.
Another thing I took from that intro section about the fool is the theory about him being captive of the Red Ship Raiders, because that actually is true. And then something I was thinking about is the other folk. Like, could that be people from the Rain Wilds? And it's just like kind of a diluted version of it because
Mm-hmm.
I know that people who kind of live around the dragon, like magic or essence or anything like that, kind of get a little bit deformed because they don't have dragons to fully turn them into elderlings. Some do have like claws and webbed hands and feet and everything. So that's kind of what that brought up for me.
That, or my first thought was the creatures on Other Island, but I think your thought makes more sense. Brain Wilds, because the creatures on Other's Island, people don't really know about unless they go there for a prophecy, and it seems like only Pirate Isle people really do that. So,
the first time
I
I
just thought
read
they were talking about
the
like
book,
the whites in general, but like I guess like knowledge of the whites isn't exactly common knowledge, especially in the six duchies.
yeah,
So yeah.
the first time I read this, I just thought it was like fairies or the fae, because I know that I think like Irish people refer to them as like the good folk. So I was like, oh, that's probably what it is. But then reading it now and having read like the Rainwild Chronicles, I'm like, this could be like something different.
Mm-hmm.
one thing I picked up on in this chapter was I feel like there was some more foreshadowing. Just with this line from Shade, he says Fitz is kind of interrogating him about his use of Karis seed. And Shade says, "Trust me, boy, I know what I can do, and I'm not so foolish as to attempt more than that." And that ultimately ends up being, it's a struggle in Tawny Man and the Fitz and the Fool, where they have to be like, don't use the witness stone so much. Don't use skill so much. Like, you are going to like lose your mind, or
You're gonna drown.
yeah, and it ends up ultimately being his downfall because he doesn't respect his limits.
Oh shit! I forget what happened to Shades. Now I'm worried.
Don't worry, we have like 15 more books before it happens.
Yeah,
Yeah,
fair.
he's one of the last ones to go.
Yeah.
Cool. Wait, is this something that happens in the last book, or like does it happen in books?
I don't remember.
Okay.
It might be the
That
last
was
book. A
because I'm
lot
like I don't
happens in the
remember if
last
I read
book.
this and I just forgot, or if this is just actually.
Well, I stopped reading 100 pages into Assassin's Fate, and
Mhm.
Shade is still alive. So, yeah, at least I think he loses his marbles in like
Okay.
either Fool's Assassin or whatever the one in the middle is. I can't remember. But
Mhm.
he is still alive as of the beginning of the last book.
Okay. Okay. Um. Oh yeah, I know. Like, I remember someone else like marked down that like the whole Fitz thinking of a dream thing is super genius, and I
Yeah,
agree. I think that's so
me.
cool. But I also love like I feel like it's intentionally or otherwise. It's like the first example of like the Fitz kind of like aping the Fool and like drawing that parallel
Yeah,
between them, where it's like, oh yeah, prophetic dreams, totally. The
yeah.
It
And
just
like
struck me
before they even
because
like know each other that well, they're just kind of.
yeah,
In sync still.
Hmm.
that part struck me because this is clearly, like I said before, unrefined talent. Um, if they would have nurtured that in him, like this charisma and this ability to manipulate people, he could have been such a good negotiator. I mean,
He
he
could have
could
been
have
a
been,
real diplomat, not just a
yeah,
secret diplomat.
right, just the way chivalry was, but instead they just abuse him.
Yeah,
And
because they don't want him at the forefront. They're like, because he's
Yeah, and they don't
always
want
that
him to get
threat
it.
to the throne.
I
Yeah,
don't want
because
him to get
they don't want him to
ideas.
start thinking, yeah, by himself. That's why he learns to take orders and just follow the rules. Or
Yep.
they
Hmm.
try to teach him to do that. Something I loved from the scene with Fitz and Lady Grace down in the kitchen is um he says he like realizes that it's her after all of this crazy stuff happens, and he's like, and I made her dog piss on her night rope. Like, I just love that because I feel like that's Birch's like manners being drilled into him, and he's like, shit, like I can't believe I did this to like a lady.
Hmm.
I thought it was too funny.
And
And
yeah,
that's like
again,
the
I
first
love
thing that he
how.
thinks of after he's like, oh, it's Lady Grace. He's like, fuck, she peed. The dog peed
Mhm.
on her.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, and I love how like after last chapter he's being so perceptive and so good. Here he's just like completely does not recognize her.
Well, it's one of those where Fitz is best when he doesn't overthink things, and he's so focused. Like, fixing an animal is one of the few things that will make Fitz not overthink because he just goes into, like, I need to help this animal. So he kind of went into that mode and ended up being, like, amazing. And then after the animal is fixed, he starts overthinking about it. Like, oh my gosh, that's Lady Grace. I just made her dog pee on her, and I talked to her like he scolds her. He's like, don't give your dog
Yeah,
bones. So he kind of feels embarrassed, but ultimately that was the right thing to do because then she respects him and she listens to him because he just
yeah.
saved her dog.
Mhm.
And whole scene and like situation reminds me so much of the story that we heard earlier about chivalry, talking about like his biggest and brightest jewels are the watchtowers being lit. And Fitz says like the jewels on her necklace sparkled as bright, or the like towers sparkled brighter than the jewels on her neck, and she said, "Let this represent my jewels." So like he's like,
Yeah.
I don't think he did this intentionally, but I think it like learning about chivalry kind of rubbed off onto Fitz.
You
It's an
definitely
insane
see that
connection.
that's like in his head. Because is it the same chapter that he hears that story about, or the chapter before? It's like
I
fairly
think it
recently.
was I thought it was like in one of the first 5.
Yeah,
Oh,
I feel like I'd remember if it was in this section.
yeah, I might be mixing it up, but he definitely like has that in the back of his mind and draws from that story because it parallels what chivalry did or said.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good connection. I'd completely forgotten that story, and yeah, I never thought of that. So, love that. Yeah. Is there anything else before we move to like the end of the chapter?
Nope.
Okay. So the end meets up with Shade. I love like he goes to Lady Time's room and then Shade just is like boy and like it immediately hits. Like that one word is all that Fitz needs to be like, oh my god. Okay. The um and then Shade said he gets a message about the raid at Forge. We know later on that it's actually um that he knows how to scry and that like that played a role because he like Fitz is like, wow, I thought it was weird how he was able to like get a message and like it's kind of implied that yeah, it was Shade's use of the
His
lesser magics.
is his scrying just his way of utilizing the skill that he has,
Yeah,
or
I
is
think he doesn't realize that it's part of the
that it's
skill,
skill? Yeah,
but it
Maybe
is.
also
because
like
he
mention
says
that
he
like the
did it as a
hedge
kid.
magics are like different and that you can have multiple of them. So like it could just be that like his whole life he believed it could also be like he's good at it because he channels it through the skill, but I think the potency with which he has it kind of makes me think that it's a separate thing, especially since it's like later called out as like hedge magics are a thing and they're distinct. But also, I don't know.
Well, it says he mentions that he did it as a kid, and I
Mhm.
don't think he'd be learning hedge magics as a little kid. But he was able to like look through water and see a little boy like growing up in a castle. Like he was basically skill spying on Shrewd as a kid without knowing what he was looking at or who he was looking at. And he just thought it was scrying and he was able to
Everyone
just
told
do
him
it.
that's what it was, that it was scrying,
Yeah.
but it turns out he was actually just using the skill in a way that was like most natural to him.
Yep.
Okay, that's fair. I completely forgot about him, or like yeah, I didn't remember that he used it as a kid, and that makes it like a lot more likely that it's the skill. Yeah.
I think it's the skill. He just doesn't know that. So he's like, I'm scrying.
I, Alas, I am skillless. It's not meant for us bastards. Uses the skill on the daily.
Yep. One thing I forgot to mention that I think Lady Time's probably always just obnoxious and terrible, but I wondered if Shade purposely kicked it up a notch to try to distract Fitz from dwelling on the fact that he may or may not have to kill Kelvar if
Oh,
he's
for
true.
sure.
Because Fitz
I
would have
think that
screwed
is
on that
definitely.
like crazy
Mhm.
if he
And I
had.
think he also did it to keep Fitz away from Lady Time a little bit so that Fitz didn't suspect that
Yeah,
she was anything more than just an actual royal lady. Because I feel like
yeah,
Fitz can be so perceptive, especially because of the way Shade is training him. So Shade didn't want to take the risk and be like, he's going to know who I am, so he's going to act weird. I just have to be like super extra about all of this.
right.
Mhm. Um, and the last thing I think I want to talk about in this chapter is Fitz being like, I have to ask this Jade, were you here because you didn't trust me? And I'm like, no. It's like again and again he has this thing of like I did like this trust issue thing. And or that people don't trust me, I don't trust them. It's just like, oh yeah, I don't have anything particularly to say about that other than sad.
Well, in his defense, Shade does stupid little tests all the time and continues to do stupid little tests. Like he's doing that shit all the way up till the last trilogy.
Yeah.
Oh no,
And
again, he has very
testing
good reason to
people.
feel that way.
Yeah, yep. Like Fitz is totally. I feel like that's a super reasonable question.
Hmm. Yeah, it's just sad that like it is a
Yeah,
reasonable question in the context of this relationship. Yeah.
Mhm.
right.
Okay. Um, and I think we can move on to the last chapter of today's episode, which is chapter 10, Revelations. So essentially, they make the hard journey to Forge, and then they meet the first group of people who we don't know this yet, but they've been touched to a skill stone and have all of their essentially soul and experiences and all of that drained away, um, in a process that becomes known as forging. Um, and this is all, and like Shay doesn't quite get what's wrong. It's just like, yeah, they're acting weird, but Fitz immediately can tell that like the threads that connect them to the world, which is kind of like the idea of like the the way he describes it feels both like kind of like an amalgamation of the wit and the skill, but just the idea of like they're cut off from the rest of the world and they don't have empathy, and so this is like, oh, scary, terrifying, and this is, and I think this is kind of like the inciting incident or like main event that kicks the book from like, well, there's still like lots of exposition stuff going on. This is like where the real conflict of the series is introduced.
Hmm.
The idea of the forgings and the Red Ship Raiders and like what do they want from us and how can we stop them?
And how are they evading us so, like, well?
Yeah.
Mhm. Which we later find out is because they have a skill user of their own. Mhm. Yeah, I think.
Um.
Oh, sorry.
In
Go ahead.
oh, sorry. In the intro, there's something. I'm gonna try to find it because he says something about like the drug coursing through my veins.
Hmm.
And the description, like I would assume it would be elf bark, considering that's Fitz's major vice, but like the description didn't, you never hear him talking about elf bark as coursing through his veins. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It says he's wondering about like the events of his birth and like the events of time and how he fits into it and how like the world would be different with if he hadn't been born. But then he goes, and then I blink and try to focus my eyes and wonder if these thoughts come from me or from the drug in my blood. It would be nice to hold counsel with Shade one last time. Which that's also a weird thing because he can hold counsel with Shade whenever he wants. Like even when he's living in his cabin, if he really wanted to, he just go to Buck.
I think he also kind of thinks that he's dying. It could also be what's the thing, Karim leaf, because he also takes he like
Is he-
takes two leaves of that at some points. He like Elfbark is his main vice, but then he also has a bunch of other little drugs that he takes to dull the pain, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And yeah, like that intro is like the most like personal / direct Fitz has been since the start of the book. Most of the time, even if like it's a first person thing, Fitz is like relatively detached, but this is like the most like
In his feels.
me. Yeah. And just like ruminating on like does free will and destiny exist? Because which is kind of like a big theme, so it's just I think focusing a little bit on that, yeah.
Mhm.
I was wondering if like Chade's use of like hair seed um was part of the reason that he like looks prematurely aged or is like prematurely like his body is giving up, at least at this part of the series, because it feels like the way that they describe how he looks on like when he's coming down off of the Kara seed feels like he's like it really like ages him, and I don't know if like if like it's kind of a cycle of like, oh, I feel tired and old because my body's getting weaker because I'm using these stimulants, so I should use more stimulants to make myself like actually be able to function better, and then but then that causes my body to degrade even further. It's just kind of like blah 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 blah.
I could definitely see Shade doing that. And like talking it away and being like, this is fine, like I can do this.
Or this is necessary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have
He's
to be
good at-
hopeful.
Yeah, he's good at convincing himself that, like, I have to do this.
For the
Like,
good of the kingdom.
you also want to, come on.
Yeah,
Mhm.
don't lie.
Right. I think Shade definitely would have died in this chapter if it were not for Fitz. This is like
Absolutely.
He would have
one of
died
those
just by falling
times
off
where,
his horse.
yeah, it's like one of those times where you can see like if Fitz had not been born, like he really is a catalyst to change things because if they would have lost Shade here, then there would be no one to kind of secretly or not so secretly combat Regal when Regal claims the crown later on. Like there's so many things that Shade does later on for in the whole rest of the series that are really helpful, and his death would have been a huge blow right here, and he absolutely, if not for falling, he would have fallen off his horse, he would have overdosed, he
Yeah.
would have been robbed and murdered, he was fully about to just walk right up to this whole large group of forged ones and they would have torn him to shreds.
And I know Fitz thinks that Shade's weaponless, but does he ever really go anywhere without some sort of protection on him? I feel like he couldn't.
Doubt it. No, I'm
He
sure he
couldn't.
has like poison and knives and a million things because he
But
teaches.
he would not have been able to fight off all the forged ones.
No, not all of them. No. That was all I had for this chapter. Not a ton of notes.
Yeah, I didn't have much here. Basically, like, I like the description of the forged ones as water with no weight or wetness. The idea of like, I thought that was a really good metaphor for describing taking the essence out of something,
Yeah.
and like it like translates this feeling of the wit, which is a sense that obviously none of the readers have, and puts it into this thing of like this tactile thing, so you can like compare it to a sense that you do have. So
hmm
like that. Yeah, I didn't really have anything else to say this chapter. It was weirdly straightforward for such an important one.
I have a couple things. So here we get a tiny, teeny, tiny, itty bitty little glimpse of a little bit into Shade's life because he said, I was born not even a mile from here, in like Wolcott or something like that. I would love to know a little bit more about Shade's life growing up. Like, do we know about how he came to Bucky or
Yeah.
how he
Yeah.
discovered? Because wasn't
So
he the
like his
Queen's bastard, not the King's?
no.
Or am I
He was
mistaken?
the king's bastard because like his mom was a soldier, and there's like a military campaign at like Sandsedge or something. Um, and then his mom came home, remarried, and then and then she died. At the age of 10, his dad was like, "Surprise, you're a royal bastard," and kind of just like put him on a mule and sent him to Buckkeep.
What is
Yeah,
with guys doing that?
the stepdad like didn't really like him, but they both loved the mom so much that they just put up with each other. So then once the mom died, the stepdad was like, I don't want to deal with you anymore. So he puts him on a mule and he's like, go to Buckkeep.
Mhm.
These two royal bastards, they've been through so much. None of the adults really want them and send them off to a place where they have to like learn to kill people.
Yep.
And they're like a threat to the crown all the time.
Mhm. And it's just like I feel like Shade can like seem intense at times, but then you like have to think back and remember that like the only purpose he has in life is like protecting the crown after like because he loses his family when he goes to Buckkeep, and then he loses the rest of his social life when he has that accident, or like he was like I guess he feels like he's lost the rest of his social life. So it's
Yeah.
just like I don't know. Yeah, it's so sad. Um, yeah, I like this line that you highlighted. It is a wonder we did not all break our necks. But there it is. Sometimes luck belongs to children and madmen. That night I felt we were both.
Oh, I love that line. I know that I think I like even snagged it from the book on my first read a long, long time ago. Because I just love like it just makes it sound like they were really free to like kind of just like they had a lightness about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing was I took something and Shade says it's after they went to Forge and they were on the road and he says, "Do you want to be stoned in the road? It's not a pleasant experience." I just want to know like how many times has poor Shade been like stoned just for kind of walking about
Just because he's like pocked.
unveiled and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really sad.
It's like
I know.
superstition plays such a big role in the Six Duchies. Like,
Yeah, definitely.
and I feel like almost like because we know that like Shade kind of like feeds into it or like plays into it. Because there's a thing about like, especially like in End of Royal Assassin, where like there's all these sightings of the Pocked Man before Regal's coronation, but also even in the first book where like I forget what it is, but like it's one of those things where like he's teaching Fitz and like uh, one of the pranks. Some like one of the boys is like, "Oh, I saw the Pocked Man. This is cursed or something." So, but it's also like I feel like he has to lean into it because it's like taking power in what otherwise would be a demeaning experience, I guess.
Shade is also just going to use every little tool or thing that he can use to his advantage. So he can kind of control the situation or manipulate people by casting doubt or casting superstition onto whatever just by showing his face. He's going to do it 100%. And
Mhm.
he's
Yes.
so smart about when and how he uses those little advantages.
Mhm.
Yeah. I can definitely see him doing that just to kind of sway the population. Like if
Mhm.
there was something that they weren't taking so seriously and he could just show up somewhere and like not say anything and not doing anything, then the people would take that situation so much more seriously because they saw this bad omen.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But that's all I've got, I think.
Mhm.
Same.
And the last line in the chapter, hard times are here, boy, and I wonder if they will ever pass. In the years to come, I was to wonder that often. Oh, always sends like shivers up my spine. Because I feel like, like, this reminds me of like the ending of the first chapter where it's like, um, something like
catalyst.
and a catalyst I became. Yeah, where it's
Oh,
like
I know.
so
I
like
love that one.
portentous. Mhm,
I love that.
mhm. And it really feels like you could divide these books into acts if you wanted to by like, does the chapter end with the portentous like line? Cool, that's the end of an act.
Yeah.
So mhm. But yeah. Um, with that, I guess we're going to be wrapping up this chapter. Next week, we're going to be doing Assassin's Apprentice chapters 11 through 15. This is actually my favorite stretch of the book. It's really painful at some points, but it introduces one of my favorite characters, Patience.
I do
And
love
it also
so much.
has, I think, my favorite scene in this book, which is it's the end of chapter 15, and it always makes me cry. So I'm super excited to talk about all of that. Um,
Oh boy.
yeah, I guess until next time, see y'all.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.